Hello everybody, it's your friendly neighbourhood book reviewer here, and today we are going to be reviewing the Atrocity Exhibition by Ballard. Now, I came across this book when I was off for a wander and down at the local church, and there was a book exchange there for free. So it was a free book that I picked up, and I picked it up because of the title. I hadn't heard of JG Ballard. Ooh, shock. But nevertheless, I found this an interesting looking book. So I'll just read a bit of the bump to you. Do like and subscribe if you enjoy bump. When the Atrocity Exhibition was published in 1970, it went on to become a cult book and is now seen as one of JG Ballard's key works. It features many of the obsessions that recur in his later books such as Empire of the Sun, High Rise, Super Canaires, as well as the seed of his most controversial work, Crash. I'm quite interested in reading Crash, really, but this book is a conceptual novel. So what that means is that it's not going to start, a middle and an end. It's really more like a bit of fanciful kind of writing. It's well written. What's here is well written, but there isn't really a story as such. It's more a reiteration of the same kind of story, same kind of idea. It's not even really a story. It's a concept. So you're going to see a reverberating concept throughout the book, and that concept is the idea that atrocities can be strongly interlinked with sexual intercourse, yeah, and there's a positivity that can be brought through from that. Because of the way it's written, I would say that the first 3/4 of the book is quite a difficult read. It's only about 170 pages long, but it's only at the end when I start to really see it shine as a piece of writing. But as a novel, I think it fails on many different levels, because it's not really a novel. It's more a creative writing piece, which is merged with scientific papers. It reads almost like a scientific paper in some parts, and I think a lot of this is reflected from Ballard's own medical training as with his medical degree there. As well as that, you've got his experience of cutting up bodies, so there are morbid parts to it, as you'd expect with Atrocity Exhibition. But I'm glad I've read it, but it may not be for you. We'll see over the coming review if it perks your interest, or if, like the wife, you find it disgusting. So let's read a bit of the start. This is page 12. Now, the version of Atrocity Exhibition I'm reading actually has clarification points. So it's got author notes at the end of each chapter to tell you what is going on. But I didn't find these useful at all. I found them confusing. If anything, it confused me more than the original text. And I'm not sure that Ballard knew what he was talking about in some parts for sure. So here we go. The way it's written, you have paragraphs with bold titles to them to begin the paragraph. So this paragraph begins, The Atrocity Exhibition. Entering the exhibition, Travis sees the atrocities of Vietnam and the Congo mimetized in an alternate death of Elizabeth Taylor. He tends the dying film star, eroticizing her punctured bronchus in the over-ventilated verandas of the London Hilton. He dreams of Max Ernst, superior of the birds. So he's beginning to lose me at the end. I don't know who Max Ernst is. I haven't googled that one. But you can see his medical training there in the anatomically correct kind of terminology there, and the way he's talking about an alternate death of Elizabeth Taylor shows the kind of morbid interest there. Now, bear in mind that he wrote this book in the coming years after his wife's unfortunate death. You know, she died too young for sure. So I think he's still in the grieving process while he was writing this book. So hence the morbid fascination with death, with disasters. He goes through. It's in the atomic age, so late 60s when he was writing this book. So atomic nuclear Armageddon was very much at the forefront. It's still here now, don't get me wrong, we just don't obsess about it like they used to back then because it was new. Everyone gets excited about something new. So as well as that, he's fascinated by the Vietnam War, the slaughter there. It's on the news constantly, and what he tries to do with that is he highlights the sexual element to atrocities. So he's comparing the media's presentations with as being a sexual kind of narrative, because it really sensationalises death and mass slaughter, murder, and whatever else you can take from a war. The burnt bodies, the corpses. So he really goes into that. I don't think the detail is as gruesome as it sounds. To be quite honest, I've read far more gruesome books than this, but it's more of a scientific perspective by saying these are the associations, and saying that the media is basically morally corrupt in presenting these images and sensationalising them. I think that's the message he's trying to get across, but he's also trying to put a sexual link in there, because I suppose he has read a lot of psychological papers, so there is the idea of a scientific death. And I've just realised I've not got on my book jacket because it's a bit warm, but I'm going to put it on now because we're going to go deep here. Sorry, please ignore that I've not tucked the shirt in. I did tuck it in on the first take, which unfortunately the camera did not record whatsoever. It recorded about 10 minutes and then gave up. So this is a completely fresh take. Queer idea on a Sunday morning, eh? It was 7 o'clock in the morning when I started this. So yeah, this idea of the link between sex and murder, not murder, sex and murder. Well, there's a link of sex and murder as well, but he's more talking about natural disasters as well as man-made disasters such as car pile-ups. And the idea behind this book, you have this character Travis, who is he's a doctor or psychologist or something, and he is involved in experiments where they have some patients or people who are involved in these experiments, and they're seeing their kind of reactions to recreated auto disasters, they also recreate Kennedy's assassination, the motorcade with the Lincoln Continental, that's also recreated in there. And they're measuring things like sexual arousal, that kind of business, and he also has sex with some of his test subjects. So the idea behind the novel is that he goes a little bit to the other side, so he crosses the boundary between doctor and patient basically. And then there's another character who is the actual scientist who seems to be in control of the whole experiment, or maybe he's a colleague on the same level as Travis, Dr. Nathan, and there are some doctor ladies as well, but it seems to be from a masculine kind of narrative, as you'd expect with this kind of era. But he has the overarching kind of view of the scientific mind, and he's seeing what Dr. Travis is doing and what he gets up to. So that is quite an interesting kind of concept, but the way it's carried off is very difficult to read, because it reiterates it goes over and over again the same kind of narrative. So we'll have a medical kind of experiment with simulated helicopter crashes, auto disasters, and then one of the characters will actually inevitably die in this process, but it's not clear whether it's an actual death or more likely it's a simulated death, and so it's something that's going on in Travis's mind. So that makes for a difficult narrative, and it does kind of jump around a little bit, so you're never too sure exactly what's occurring. This is not a clear book whatsoever to understand, and I think if you read it the first time you're still not going to understand what happens. I'm talking through it with a little bit of confidence, but really this is my understanding of how things pan out. It's not in any way going to be correct. Maybe it's going to be 60% correct if I'm good enough, but who knows what Ballard actually meant, and who knows what the actual truth is as well, because I think it's beyond Ballard. I think his knowledge was also limited back then. I'm not sure if his notes help very much, to be quite honest. Sometimes they just cloud it even more, as I've already said. Another thing he does, because it's scientific, he tends to list things. So there's whole sections where he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, So in this one it's conceptual games. So he puts really exciting titles to these things that you might have in a medical paper. So conceptual games. Dr. Nathan pondered the list on his desk pad. 1. The catalogue of an exhibition of tropical diseases at the Wellcome Museum. That sounds normal. 2. Chemical and topographical analysis of a young woman's excrement. Okay, it's going a bit weird now. 3. Diagrams of female orifices. Buccal, orbital, anal, urethral, some showing wound areas. Definitely gone deep on that one, hasn't he? Yeah, and result number 4. This one could be a psychological one. The results of a questionnaire in which a volunteer panel of parents were asked to devise ways of killing their own children. Number 5, I mean that's something that could come up, in fairness. They've had people electrocuting other people, simulation-wise, in the Millikan experiment, so for sure, why wouldn't they ask that to parents? Psychologists do all sorts of queer business. Yeah, so that's what we have. There are some others as well which are less exciting, but it is interesting. It does make for interesting reading. It's just not very clear exactly what's going on. And what else did I have here? And more conceptuals. So this I kind of bring up because it's quite interesting in a way. So what have we got? I mean, it's, oh, there we go, Deaf Games. Deaf Games Vietnam. Yeah, even I'm getting confused about what my notes are upon here. Dr. Nathan gestured at the war newsreel transmitted from a television set. Catherine Austin watched from the radiator panel, arms folded across her breasts. Why does he mention the arms folded across the breasts? Again, sexualising things. And, funny enough, men do think things like, oh, she's got her arms folded across the breast. That, I thought, does occur to men every now and then. I'm not saying it occurs all the time, it certainly does not for me, and I only think of those things about my own wife, not about other people's wives whatsoever. Yeah, glad we sorted that one out. Any human tragedy, Vietnam, this is her speaking, any human tragedy, Vietnam, let us say, can be considered experimentally as a larger model of a mental crisis mimetised in faulty stare angles or skin junctions, breakdowns in the perception of environment and consciousness in terms of television and news magazines in war. The war in Vietnam has a latent significance very different from its manifest content. So basically he's comparing the war in Vietnam to the angle on that bookcase, for example, Christ on a Bike. Now that is one experimental leap in the consciousness, isn't it? To be able to do that. And he takes it one step further because he says basically you can get sexualized, you know, you could get an erection or a male or female erection, you could get sexually engorged, right, by looking at an angle on a bookcase. And I think that is a concept that is really, really interesting, but it's a bit far-fetched. And that's one of the things I don't quite agree with. So that's where he brings in all these kind of out of the box theories, and it's good. It's good to read that kind of stuff, but it is a novel after all. It's not factual, but there are factual elements. This is another interesting part. So he talked about auto disasters. So he had the motorcade of the President Kennedy, you know, getting shot in the Lincoln Continental. So basically he's trying to make a link between that and sex. So he's actually saying that people find cars sexually attractive because of that murder of a president. So here we are. By the figure of the president's wife, that's the title. So, involuntary orgasms during the cleaning of automobiles. Studies reveal an increasing incidence of sexual climaxes among persons cleaning automobiles. In many cases, the subject remained unaware of the discharge of semen across the polished paintwork and complained to his spouse about birds. So yeah, first off, I think semen on a car, I've never seen it myself, but I imagine looks completely different than bird shit. And if I had that situation with my missus, I think I'd probably have to come clean, or I'd have to invent something more convincing than bird shit. Secondly, if you ejaculate while you're washing a car, I assume you don't have your penis out while you're washing the car, so why would the semen leave the trousers in the first place? Bit unbelievable, matey, but I like the conceptual thought of the idea of cars generating orgasms. You know, it's never done it in me, not even an erection, unless it involved a female. So there you go. Or a sexually attractive partner, I should say. I shouldn't be objectifying women, etc. Right, so that is a bit of a far-fetched thought, right? But I'm not going to put it out of mind that there can be these thoughts in people's minds that people can sexualize objects, because it does happen. You know, objects that you don't associate with sex. But I think one of the central themes of this sex and atrocity thing is that they take characters like James Dean and Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe to a lesser extent, but they're all kind of sexual, you know, attractive people, I should say. But it's people sexualizing these people who are dead more because they're dead, and they get eroticized by elements associated with them, such as the Lincoln Continental. He talks about people buying Lincoln Continentals just so that they can sexualize them. You know, men who are not homosexual get sexually eroticized by the thought of Kennedy being dead in his car, so they get aroused by a car, by another man, and via the car. So that is interesting for a start. And here's another interesting concept, and can you guess what it is from what I read out here? Relatives of auto crash victims showed a similar upsurge in both sexual activity and overall levels of general health. Mourning periods were drastically reduced. So there we go. After a brief initial period of withdrawal, relatives would revisit the site, usually attempting a discreet reenactment of the crash mode. In an extreme 2% of cases, spontaneous orgasms were experienced during a simulated run of the crash route. So what that's saying is, people who have just lost a loved one, who are mourning, are revisiting a site, perhaps even of a loved one's death in an auto disaster, or even the book depository where Kennedy got shot from, and they're getting so eroticized there that they get an erection and a sexual discharge. I mean, I assume it means males and females as well, but it seems to come from a male perspective, a lot of it. And let's face it, men a bit more kinky. I mean, that's not entirely true, is it? So yeah, but I think the interesting part of the story there is the idea that people can get a benefit from watching, from being in places where these tragedies have happened, and from simulating a tragedy in the mind, they get a sexual experience, and they get they get a benefit from how it assists their mourning period. Now, at this point, Ballard is firmly within a mourning period. I'm not going to question how he dealt with that, but there may have well been a sexual element. I think that's what he's indicating, that sex will help the mourning period. And I don't know. I'm not going to say it doesn't help. For me, I don't remember that, to be quite honest. I don't remember a period of that, but people will mourn in very different ways. And if that's what anybody does, I'm not going to criticise it, because I don't think there's anything wrong with whatever you do during mourning, because that is a shitty time, to be quite honest. Right, so we've got to the most interesting part of the book for me, because I did say the bottom quarter of the book, the end of the book, is by far the best, and this is the best chapter overall. It's the chapter which caused this book, the entire first edition, to be pulped in America, because they would not publish it. The publishers would not publish this, and this is the awesome bit. The chapter is titled "Why I Want to Fuck Ronald Reagan." He's a sexy guy, don't get me wrong. You know, I mean, if I would be tempted to cross the boundary, and yeah, why not? Nice looking guy, but maybe not to go as far as fucking. Sorry for saying that, YouTube, but it's in the book. Yeah. What the concept behind it is, it's all about auto disaster. It's about people taking the what is it? The auto, because he calls the the assassination of Kennedy in the Lincoln Continental, that's an auto-disaster. So he brands that as an auto-disaster. And he talks about people imagining Ronald Reagan in a similar kind of assassination or auto-disaster. There was an attempted assassination on Reagan, which occurred after this book was published. Oh, that would have been awesome. He would have definitely included that. But numerous studies have been conducted upon patients in terminal paresis, placing Reagan in a series of simulated auto crashes, e.g. multiple pile-ups, and then basically they've metamorphosized to sexualize these things, and even men who are not homosexual will cross the boundary to find Ronald Reagan extremely attractive, sexy guy, and want to have anal sex with him. There are fantasies of that because of that kind of idea of auto crashes. So I think that's an interesting concept of taking a strong political figure and sexualising them in that way, especially a man, because I think too often we see the sexualisation of strong female political leaders. I think that's really getting quite boring now. I think we need to see more sexualisation of male leaders to really balance it out. Not that I'm interested in that kind of thing, I just want to see a bit of equality, you know what I'm saying? But I think it's an interesting concept, how people can jump from one to the other. Now, I saw a YouTube review of 2 minutes and 51 seconds, which had no content whatsoever. This review is full of content, but that said, that this book, he predicts Ronald Reagan becoming president, which he does not in this book. He does not. If you actually read the book, he does not predict Reagan becoming president, but he does predict a similar auto-disaster than which occurred with a president. So, yeah, I think that's the way the story goes. The idea with the science of it as well. They recreate auto-disasters, and the kind of characters within it will visit these auto-disasters and discuss them, and then eventually a sexual narrative will emerge. So it goes through that kind of phase repeatedly during the first part of the book till you get to the back quarter when it mellows out a bit more and gets more into a story, to be quite honest. Is it worth reading? Well, the first part is terrible. It's probably 2 to 3 stars in the first part. The back part is 4 stars, and there's the Ronald Reagan section. It's definitely 5 stars from me. But the book overall, I would rate. So overall, I would rate the book at 3 stars, but I'm looking at it from the perspective as a novel. Because although it says it's a conceptual novel, I really don't think it is a novel. I think it fails on that element. But as an entertaining read, bear in mind everything that I've gone over, I have enjoyed reading this book. I've just found it a bit difficult during the first 3/4 of the book, and I've really only got going right at the end. So I may well read it again, so I'm going to keep this book for future reading, see if I can glean any more facts from it. Don't get me wrong, the actual research is strong there. I think his own personal experience of Ballard are reflected in the writing, so I do like and subscribe for that, eh? And his own experiences. So he was brought up in a Japanese prisoner of war? No, a Japanese internment camp, because he was a civilian child, so he was probably about 13 or 14 when he was in the camp with his parents there. And so he has experienced some form of oppression and atrocities in his own way. And he was then sent to the UK, so that's a bit of a shock for a start. When he was age 16, and he went to medical school. He didn't become a doctor in the end, but he did become a novelist. I'm quite glad he did, because I think this book is of value and it's worth reading for people who are interested in what I've just read out to you. And it does have some great concepts in it, and I think it's quite interesting. It all reads from an American perspective as well, so he was fascinated with American cars. He thought English cars UK cars back in those days were terrible, which I suppose they were. We all used to fantasise about American cars. I did back in the 80s. I used to love the idea of American cars, and we used to talk in American accents. I think Ballard has similarly fallen in love with the American culture, and this book does exude that, but it has an English kind of wacky theme to it, so it marries the two kind of cultures together nicely. So yeah, as a conceptual novel, if that's how we're going to review it, I'd put much higher stars on it. But as a novel, it's got to be 3 stars, unfortunately. And yeah, I'd encourage you to read it if you like what you hear about that. Yeah, but overall, thank you very much for watching. I hope that's helped you understand this book a little bit more. If you have any comments on the book after having read it yourself, then do drop them below and we can have a bit of a debate about it, eh? But overall, thank you very much for taking the time.